Welcome into another episode of Discard for Magic. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron.
And I'm the other host, James or Jexik.
And today we're going to dive into some deck building. James is going to preview Brub and a brief history, he says. I don't know how that's going to play out. It might be a little bit longer history. James, why don't you just start out and we'll ask you the questions that we ask people who come back on the podcast, because you've never been here before.
I've never been here. No, it's totally new.
What keeps you coming back to Summoner Wars?
Very broadly, the game is fun, obviously, or I wouldn't be here, but I also like the community that we've created. That's not something that happens by accident. It's not just not being toxic or not being mean. You have to actively be helpful and positive and encouraging to new players and get them excited about things. It's like an act of kindness, not more so than just not being a jerk. I think it's a lot more to it than that. And it's not an accident. It's something that Colby had been doing back with the Heroescape website a long time ago, and we continue to try to do here, I think.
Yeah, that's it for sure. I mean, not many communities, especially online, you'll find like the Summoner Wars community that we have in our Discord, which is exciting to see. So hopefully that keeps being the case. What do you enjoy about deck building?
I think it's like an opportunity for self-expression. I'm not looking to make the most powerful deck. It's more just messing around with something and trying to find something cool, some cool interaction, and then running with it. When I first started out with Brub, I was just wondering, how could you make this card good? Because it didn't seem like a good card. And then I just kind of kept running with that idea and seeing where it led. I've come from playing Heroescape and Magic the Gathering and other games that have you either make army lists or decks and things like that. So it's a skill that I've kind of just, built up over the years, and something that I think is also like a fun form of self-expression and exploration. But I already kind of mentioned Brub, so I should probably talk about what the card actually does as far as Brub goes. It's my avatar on the Discord and everything else, but it looks like this orc with a bald head and a big gun. It costs 5 magic and has 7 health and 1 attack, which sounds awful, so it's got 1 strength. But it's got an ability called Chain Shot that when it attacks, if all of your dice show a bow, it gets to attack again. So it's attacking with 1 die. If it gets a bow, which is a 2/3 chance, 4 out of 6 sides of the dice, it can immediately attack again, making an extra attack. So it doesn't count towards your 3 attack limit. So you can attack as many times as you want, provided you keep hitting. The math on it is, on average, it'll do 2 damage a turn per attack that you get with it, or per extra reroll you get, which I'll get into later.
You mentioned Brub has a gun, but you didn't really specify what type of gun. Brub has a Gatling gun, and that really feels thematic of how Brub feels in games sometimes, because he's just slowly rolling up that gun and just starts spinning and spinning and just starts tearing through things, especially if you get a lot of rerolls, because then he can just continually shoot and shoot and shoot and shoot.
The funny thing about Brub is he actually came out, I think, when Phoenix Elves and Tundra Orcs first came out, or even earlier. It was like a promo with the Ice Tower, and then we got it with the Phoenix Elves Tundra Orc starter set. But most people weren't deck building with the physical game yet, so nobody really did it. And it wasn't until it came out alongside the Obsidian Dwarves and the Sand Goblins in November of 2022 is when he was actually available online. So it took a while before people actually got to play with Brub or Black Saber or any of the other mercenaries.
And it was kind of good timings that it came out with the Obsidian Dwarves, because that is another aspect of your deck. A couple of Obsidian Dwarves cards make it in there and are pretty crucial.
Yeah, and I guess before I get to that, let's talk about what deck building was like in Summoner Wars at the start. Because the funny thing about Summoner Wars is that when the Master Set comes out, you have all 12 symbols represented. You actually can't do any deck building with just a Master Set. Deck building first became possible once the Tundra Orcs and Phoenix Elves starter set came out, because then you have 2 decks that share symbols. So the Phoenix Elves came out and they shared symbols with Red Talus's Fire and the Vanguard's Divine symbol, whereas the Tundra Orcs shared symbols with Cave Goblins, the Polar Dwarves with the Water. So early on, Tundra Orc decks before Brub, they were one of the first decks you could do deck building with, and you might use a Polar Bear, or you might use Slingers. Slingers work really well with for Glory, because the only thing that has to be in your deck when you do deck building is your starting setup and your epic event. And thankfully Grognak, which is what I end up doing the Brub deck with, has For Glory, which allows you to, all your commons get to 2 extra strength that turn, but if they do not roll at least 2 specials on their attack, they damage themselves however much damage they would have dealt. So Slingers normally roll 2 dice, they can roll 4 then, and if they die, it's no big deal. They cost 0, similar to the Tundra Charger that also comes in the base deck for Tundra Orcs. That's a common thing early on, what they used to do. They also allowed you to take Freeze out. You could take Freeze out and maybe get Pile On from Cave Goblins, or maybe even like a Glacial Shift from the Polar Dwarves to be more aggressive. Glacial Shift, which allows you to move your structures. But I'd say like early on, Tundra Orcs are just kind of middling when it came to deck building, and some of the best decks were once the Fungal Dwarves came out, they had some really good decks with Fallen Kingdom and things like that.
Yeah, and a lot of those early decks didn't feel complete fully, because in deck building, the main sense of it is you want to make your deck more synergistic than it already is in base deck. Like, that's the goal. Unless you're just trying wacky things. But if you're trying to make the deck as good as it can be, you want to just make it as synergistic as it can be for the most part.
Yeah.
And a lot of those decks lacked a lot of good cards to add that really added synergy in those first couple decks that came out that allowed deck building to happen.
Although I think I will give a mention to Cave Goblins. I think once Cloaks came out, Cave Goblins got real good just because they got Dagger. So then they had 2 copies of the Sly ability in their deck and allow you to take the Eater out. So you take the Eater out, put in Dagger. That's just a huge upgrade, like massive upgrade. And if you wanted to get Since in for another 0-coster, you could. But often Smeg and Blarf would be enough.
And you had Brutal Force already. And
yeah, Brutal Force from the Tundra Orcs. So they had some good combos going already. And the Charger. Charger is a decent common to add from the Tundra Orcs.
And then once Obsidian Dwarves dropped, you had the Axe. And
the most relevant matchups in the early days were like worrying about Cave Goblins and worrying about the Fungal Dwarves. Because Fungal Dwarves could put in undead units and get so much like recursion and carrier stuff going on that they were pretty tough. Let's talk about once Brub appears. So Brub appears in November of 2022. I had actually taken like a month off of playing much Summoner Wars before that, relatively. I was just getting hammered at work. It was really like it was just a tough time of year. I was working at the post office. I just was really tired and I just didn't have the mental energy to play the base decks of Eternal Council and Fungal Dwarves. I just had a huge lack in my understanding of those decks. Lo and behold, struggling at the post office, and I quit that job, and like a week later, or about the same time, Brub appears, along with the Obsidian Dwarves. So I have a few weeks there between when I got my next job and that one, and I was just playing a ton of Brub decks. And the way Brub works with Obsidian Dwarves is they add a very important common. The core of the deck, I'd say, besides Brub, Grognak already gets 1 boost a turn, and then he caps out at that boost. You can't get additional boost normally, unless you have Ragnar. But Ragnar's ability gives boosts for every special symbol he rolls when he attacks. And if you add Oathsworn, who have the exact same ability from the Obsidian Dwarves commons, with also a 3 strength but ranged, you get even more boosts. So you can stack up boosts even without getting Ragnar out, and this on this 1 cost common that has 3 strength, 2 life, and range, and you start getting up to 5, 6, 7 boosts, and suddenly your Brub that's going to do 2 damage on average might do 10, 15 damage in a single turn, which is enough to, destroy a summoner or destroy a gate and just win on the spot. So suddenly Brub became like a very lethal thing, and it kind of unexpected that it worked for me, because I just kind of thought, what silly thing can I do? So Oathsworn was the first thing I knew had to go in the deck. I also found what else can we do with lots of boosts is the questions you got to ask yourself when you're making a Tundra Orc / Brub deck. There's a unit they're called the Tundra Fighter in the base Tundra Orc deck. There's probably one of the worst commons in the game in a vacuum, because it has this very unreliable ability that after it attacks, you roll a die. And if you get a special, which is just a 1 out of 3 chance, it can force 1 space, or has to force 1 space, and then attack again. And it only has 2 strength. It only rolls 2 dice. So not only does it have this unreliable ability, but also, even if you get that special, it only rolls 2 dice. But if you couple it with the Hellforged Axe from the Obsidian Dwarves, now it's rolling 4 dice, and you can reroll that shot at Frenzy, and suddenly can do a lot of damage. It goes from doing maybe attacking twice with 2 dice, having a very high chance of attacking multiple times with 4, or even 6 if you combine Hellforged Axe with For Glory, that epic event I mentioned earlier. And once you're rolling 6 dice, your odds of getting at least 2 specials to not damage yourself and to keep going are pretty good. So sometimes you're rolling 6 dice 2, 3 times in a turn, which is enough to take out a summoner, and at a very low magic cost. You don't need the 5 that you have for Brub, you just have the 1 from a Tundra Fighter.
And the Tundra Fighter often overshadows Brub a little bit in this deck, because there's turns in which, the Tundra Fighter was probably winning just as many games for you as Brub was. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'd say so. In the first iteration of the deck, I was also running 1 times Brutal Force, which is the event that allows you to force something after you attack, as long as the thing that's attacking isn't dead. Combined with the axe and the Brutal Force, you can push something, hit it, frenzy, hit it again, and so on. The interesting thing looking back at my deck, when I first wrote this article called Brubocalypse Now, which is on SW Zone, I only had 1 copy of Willpower, and I haven't mentioned Willpower yet, but Willpower is an extremely important event because it gives a boost to Grognak on its own, and it lets you reroll all of your attacks that turn. So it's like a free extra reroll for Brub, helps you keep units alive that are attacking with For Glory. It's just a great event. And I also actually had 2 copies of Unrelenting because the Fallen Kingdom and Fungal Dwarf matchups were so prevalent that I didn't want my units getting converted by carriers or fungal beasts. It just shows how much the meta can affect something. The other side of it is it allows me to get even more than 4 Oathsworn in a game. If my Oathsworn get killed while I have Unrelenting up, I could just play another Oathsworn. I had Ragnar, who's, like I already said, gives boosts, and Devura was my other champ, mostly because she was ranged, because I didn't really find myself getting to 3 boosts with her that much and actually attacking with Grognak. The one thing I'll say about this deck compared to normal Grognak, where he kind of wants to fight, is that you really want to stay back. You want to be close enough to use that influence of 3 range, but not so close that he's actually fighting stuff and getting into combat if you can avoid it. It's really going to come down to the fighters and Brub to do the damage. That original deck, I had 3 Beast Riders and 1 Bear Cavalry, just to kind of like give the opponent something else to think about while they were facing down either the fighters or Brub. Beast Rider just gave me a little extra reach, and Bear Cavalry, you'd be surprised how often that trample could surprise somebody. And then I also had 4 Slingers, which, as I said, was mostly just because it was really good with For Glory. If you're paying For Glory to get a ton of boosts with your Oathsworn, you might as well have Slingers out too.
And then your deck started to change as other decks were released.
The Obsidian Dwarves came out alongside Sand Goblins, and Sand Goblins were never that big in deck building. But the next release, even though it didn't give anything to the Tundra Orcs, came with the Shadow Elves and the Wayfarers. And Shadow Elves were bursting onto the scene because they just had such good combos of events. Suddenly that deck was immediately one of the most powerful decks. Like, they had all these combo decks with Renewed Hope or Blood Summon or both. It was just a deck to watch out for. I was more worried about big combos that would hit Grognak and kill him immediately. So when Swamp Orcs came out, I was actually really excited about the Drudger. The Drudger is a common that it costs 1, but if you leave it next to your summoner and your summoner gets hit, the Drudger just takes the hit and disappears, soaks up a hit. So some of these decks are just trying to hit you a few times really big. You use like an Undead Warrior with 7 attack or whatever. If you've got that Drudger there, it could at least eat one of those attacks. So I used Drudgers for a bit. I thought about using the Bog Witch, but I had trouble getting it consistently to 2 boosts, because I even had a deck, I think at one point, that had like Volcor, the champion from the Obsidian Dwarves, who can get up to 6 or 7 attack if you get lots of boosts on him. You get boosts on him by getting boosts on Grognak, so it seems like it should work. I've never really liked using it that much because often you won't have your champion out when you're getting the boost. You might get all the boosts out one turn when you just have a few commons out, and then you summon your champion. It's not like Balzar, who can always try to get boosts on his turn with his attack. It wasn't that consistent, and this pie in the sky day of like attacking twice with Volcor with a witch just never really happened. Didn't really keep Volcor in there very long. Sometimes I'd play Shank just for a big body that is good with those extra rerolls. And Shank was back from the base deck, but I'd bring him out sometimes when I didn't want to play Devura. The Drudgers were the best thing out of there. Vine Gates seem useful just to have extra gates, but there's not that much that I want to boost aside from the Bog Witch, which, as I said, I still had trouble getting her to work right. I might have played Blub, who rhymes with Brub sometimes, who can jump out and attack for 5 dice really quick. At 5 cost, he wasn't that valuable a lot of the time, so I don't think I kept him very long either. My commons would kind of switch around, but the core of the deck was always 4 Oathsworn, 4 fighters, and then from there were lots of flex spots over the years. And I say the years because this was back in 2022, which was 3 years ago, and I'm still playing this deck. The next deck that actually potentially offered something to the Tundra Orcs was the Mountain Vargath. Mountain Vargath have some great units and great events. I've seen Tundra Orc decks that use Ramming Advance, that use the Slagborn Fighter, that use the Brutes, that use Battle Leader, which allows you to get an extra attack. And Battle Leader works great with Primal Fury from the original Grognak deck. But that's not what this deck is doing. Like I said, you don't want Grognak up there. You're not even necessarily trying to charge onto your opponent's side of the field with Ramming Advance. As much as that is a potentially viable Tundra Orc deck, that's not the Brub deck that we're talking about today. So Mountain Vargath didn't give us very much. Shimmersea Fae was interesting. with Brub and Ragnar and some of these other champions, you often want to summon a champion in this deck. And they had a lot of champion-centric themes in the Shimmer Sea Fae. So the Tidebreaker, a 1-cost, essentially 3 strength and 3 life unit, is actually really good. And it has Rush, which allows you to summon extra things out of the same spot, essentially. I actually used Tidebreakers for a bit there, as well as I experimented a bit for a while with using Spearhead, which is the event that allows you to attack diagonally and get 1 extra strength with your summoner. And I brought back Devura, who lets your summoner attack extra times. So as much as I was saying don't attack with Grognak, Spearhead actually allows you to attack with him a little more safely because it allows you to attack diagonally behind something else. And with that Devura double attack, you could sometimes catch somebody for 10 dice diagonally melee, which could really put a lot of hurt. For a while I called it like the third kind of heat, which was just a reference to an old 30 Rock sketch when Jack Donaghy shows up at the start of it. The idea was that if Brub is one way to win and fighters are another way, this third thing your opponent has to think about was Spearhead Grognak, and it worked pretty well for a while. It was a pretty strong deck, I think. All that changed when the Filth arrived on the scene, because the Filth brought with it something very important, which was the mutants and the fetid cultists. Fetid cultists, when they die, they put a boost on your summoner. Now imagine if we had a deck that wanted boosts on its summoner. That might be good. Oh yeah.
What deck would that be?
This deck wants all the boosts on the summoner. So getting lots of extra boosts on your summoner. And also it pairs with a bestial mutant, which when you summon the fetid cultist, you have to kill it to put a bestial mutant down. But bestial mutant, whenever it kills something, it has to cost 3 magic for a 3/5, and when it kills something, you get 2 more boosts on your summoner. The addition of these 4 fetid cultists, the bestial mutant, means it before you maybe would get 5 or 6 boosts and be happy with that. But now I get 10, 12, 13 boosts some games, and that just cranks up that inevitability engine for your endgame win cons, and it just makes it a lot better. Around this time, I'm trying to think of the other commons I would use. There's also another event that gives boosts in Zeal. Puts 1 boost out, and then every time a unit dies that turn, you get to force your summoner 1 space. I will admit I never actually found many uses for Zeal. I would instead, at this time, I think, still use Brutal Force. The one thing I will mention, though, at this time, is that when the Filth came out, they were the most broken thing that ever happened to deck building. And we had a deck building tournament. There were 2 Filth decks that went 48-1 with their only loss going against each other. They were played by Game Bear and Loxy Sama. Same pool at the end, otherwise they would have been a mirror match for the final, and their decks were very similar. It featured Devura, an infinite boost engine, essentially, that would create 15 magic a turn if you needed it, while at the same time it had Blood Summon to just create tons of units, and you could use Call Forth and all kinds of things to just get so much value out of Blood Summon and also just win on the spot. It had to have tons of reach, win on the spot, do stuff with Bursting Mutant over and over again, kill all your blockers. It feels quaint when people complain about the balance in base deck sometimes when like a 56% win rate deck is too good. This was like a 90% plus win rate deck that only lost to itself. We haven't seen anything like it before or since, really. And that's not to say that I think deck building is inherently flawed. It's just that it wasn't focused on as much. So that's why down the road we've had changes to Blood Summon and other things like that. And I think Fallen Kingdom are going to be a more interesting deck now for changing the way Blood Summon works. So we'll see. Even in base decks is what I'm saying. In that tournament, I think I had a pretty good win rate. I was like 18-6 or something like that. Like I ended up being in the top pool, not even in the top 6 players or whatever. I had the best Tundra Orc deck in the field, but I think Tundra Orcs as a deck in general are not overly powerful, and mine is just pretty powerful, but not necessarily even one of the strongest decks. You know, there's definitely stronger archetypes here and there throughout time. I mostly did it in a lark to see if it would work. How can we make this Brub card good? It looks silly.
Yeah, let's shift viewpoints. And as somebody who has been also in the deck building scene for a while and been playing a different type of deck and played against you probably 20, 30 times, maybe more, from the point of view of how playing against Brub evolved. Often, like when you would play against a Brub deck, some people wouldn't realize this right away, but it's fairly predictable. Grognak has a lot of boosts and 5 magic. You got to be very wary of where Brub can come out and what lanes Brub can fire down. And those were like the biggest misnomers when you were playing against this deck. Is people would sometimes get frustrated when they're playing against this deck if you had a lot of boosts and you fire just straight through what's left of their 10 health gate and hit their summoner behind it. But what you have to realize is that whatever that health that gate was at, 7, 8, or whatever, it's not enough if you have enough boosts to compensate on Grognak. If there's only like a couple boosts on Grognak, you might be fine. But if Grognak's pushing like those high boost counts you were talking about, up to like 10 or more, no lane is safe with that many rerolls. And so you really have to position your summoner outside of the fray. And the deck that I played for the most part was fairly good at doing this. I played a lot of Cave Goblins, so the ability to sly out with sneaks saved me from many a Brub attack. Once you were done dealing with the Brub portion of the deck, whether Brub came out or didn't come out, I found that, like I mentioned earlier, often the more scary part of the deck sometimes was those Tundra Fighters, because even if you didn't have as many rerolls, they could be just as deadly, if not more, because, well, you need more rerolls to compensate for Brub, but with like 3 or 4 rerolls, sometimes you could get 3 or 4 attacks going, a Tundra Fighter rolling 4 or 6 dice each attack, and that's a recipe for disaster. And you even had one turn in which you, wasn't against me, but against somebody, you won in the very first turn this way with a Tundra Fighter.
Yeah, against another Tundra Orc deck, I think. I was also set up by a Beast Rider. So I had a Beast Rider on one side, and the starting Tundra Fighter, I put an axe on it. I played for glory, dashed down the side with 6 dice with the Beast Rider. Managed to get a couple frenzies off with the fighter and finish off the other Grognak on the first turn. That's the only time I've done it out of, playing hundreds of games. So I don't think it's that. It was just a novelty, But they didn't even get to play. I was my first turn, and they just open up their app, and it's like, game's over. Like, whoops.
Crazy. But for the most part, this Tundra Orc is not in that same explosive combo of like those filth decks, which you were talking about.
Right.
And some of those like Shadow Elves decks. Any of the decks that really played Blood Summon had or some of the other like combo decks we can talk about later with like maybe Renewed Hope and Zeal and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But those decks really had a different level of unpredictability that your deck doesn't really have. Doesn't mean it's not strong. When you were playing against a Brub deck, you knew what you were getting yourself into for the most part. But it's sometimes that inevitability you were talking about, it's just hard to stop. If Brub's protected and can get close and there's no way for you to stop that line, then Grog's got the rerolls. You might be done for.
Yep. One more deck came out that did prove the deck I want to bring up, because it's actually a pretty significant card that came out a little bit ago from the Isle of Ekid, and that is the Waveborn Relic, because that basically combines like half of an axe and a brutal force in one. Allows the fighter to force and get extra strength from one card. So it allows you to get to 5, 6, 7 dice pretty easy with a fighter. Force your target, so you don't need quite as many rerolls and many frenzies then if you're just forcing the target with your attack. I found that to be pretty useful. And in order to fit the Waveborn Relic, I took Spearhead out, so it's back to just the 2 win cons essentially. But it works pretty well. You started touching on some of the faction weaknesses. I think another thing that keeps the deck in check overall is that, unlike the Shadow Elves, some of these other decks that draw lots of cards and are combo decks, Grognak and Brub, they're at the mercy of the card. You don't get to draw extra cards, and you have no way of like searching your deck. It's not like a Swamp Orc deck that can search for Waitui. Brub is important, but only so important, and you can't count on getting him at any point in time. You can count on having the 5 magic and creating that threat your opponent might be worried about, but you don't know if you'll actually get Brub early. I think the other limitation that I found is, like you were saying, is that sometimes you just body check the gates or just get in the way of where Brub can go, and then he can't reach the targets that are most important. So I'd say factions that are tough for him to face would also be stuff like the Cave Goblins, or like some other decks here and there that just put a lot of pressure on me, like other Tundra Orc decks, or like I've run into some weird Sand Goblins decks, or even like Prophet's old High Elves deck that just puts things in the way that are tough to kill at first, and if they're blocking my gates, can make it difficult to get out.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, sort of like you were just saying there, that the early pressure can really be tough for like a Brub deck to deal with, because if you have to be constantly putting out fires and you don't really have time to like build up to that 5 magic and get to Brub if you're trying to stay alive.
And the other thing that kind of happens is that I like all three of my champions and want to try to play them each game. So I can get in situations like in first edition where you might have 2 or 3 champions in your hand and you're actually kind of stuck or having to make tougher decisions about which ones to discard. I very rarely will discard Brub, and sometimes I think in hindsight I probably should have, just because he wasn't going to be useful enough that game. And the one thing I've found to try to counter my gates being targeted, I've started to use Tundra Chargers or like those Tide Breakers or other units that allow you to, at least if you only have one summoning space open, to maybe get more guys out from that same spot. For a brief time, I also used Changeling Swarms, which like when you force out with a Tundra Charger, you could then put a Changeling Swarm down and attack with it right away to try to clear those gate spots. But I've kind of found that the situation doesn't arise often enough to make it really worth it, so I'm still kind of debating as what to put in my last 4 common slots, but it's definitely 4 Feated Cultists, 4 Oathsworn, and 4 Fighters from here on out for a while, I think.
And 4 Bear Cavalry.
I like having like 1 sometimes. People think Bear Cavalry is not that strong a unit, but like I said, Fighter is not a good unit in base decks. But I think there's a lot of units that do something interesting, and like Changeling Swarms is another good example of that. The units that do something interesting are often better in deck building than units that are just good economic value. I didn't really touch on earlier, but I think is worth mentioning is that I think one thing I like about deck building in general, you might say some of these combo decks are a dominant strategy, but a combo deck like that doesn't even exist really to that extent in base deck. And aggressive decks in general, I think, perform better in deck building. If you want to see more aggression or you want to see more combos or just more things besides grindy econ games, the one thing that Cheez-Its and Game Bear always say is like your deck has to do something in deck building. It has to create some kind of pressure, some kind of kill pressure, or else it's just not going to be threatening enough. Do you agree with that, Aaron?
Yeah, I think so. Like if you don't have some sort of gimmick's not the right word, but some sort of aspect to your deck that's like really hard to deal with, then people can just like wait you out, or like they don't really have to take your deck seriously. For example, with your Brub deck, you have a couple, like with Fighters and Brub. A lot of the combo decks, they have just one, but they just try and get to that one combo. Cave Goblins have several methods. Not all might prove critical. You get hit by Dagger, that's going to hurt. If you get hit by like an Enrage the Horde with an axe, that could prove fatal, depending on how many they have. You throw a Brutal Force in there, and that's probably fatal. So, I mean, you need to have something that really feels threatening. And I've seen people try and do like fun combo decks, sometimes with like making like Biters the focus point. And like Biters are a fun card to play around, but it's not super threaten. It does 1 damage, 2 if you get the attack to hit, and you can get that up a little bit with some interesting, funny things like Conqueso and weird little combos. But that's not decks like that don't have a big enough threat to really make you do something.
Aaron, you got to ask me the question that is burning in everyone's minds.
What do you discard for Magic?
Yes. Which cards? The interesting thing is, like I say, I have 4 of each of my commons, but it's often commons that I am discarding. I usually won't discard Oathsworn because I want those boosts. But if I do not have a weapon or a relic or the 4 glory, and I have 2 fighters especially, I'm not going to want to put all those events on 2 different fighters. I'm just going to want to put them on 1. So I might discard 1 fighter to try to get to that one. Or if I have commons that are in my flex slots that aren't that important, I might discard them. The one thing I rarely do is to either discard my events or champions, because like willpower is so important. The axes are so important that I want to try to use them to their maximum effect. And that's often how you end up winning the game. And same goes for Brub. Bestial Mutant is also just like such a key player. It can make some tough decisions or tough hands when you're like really trying to hold on to that Bestial Mutant and wait for the cultists and things like that. But it just generates so much boost that it creates a lot of value. So the short version is my commons, but not all of them. But I do discard pretty heavily to try to get to that 5 magic or 3 magic so that I can threaten my champions.
If you have to discard one of your champions, which one do you prefer to discard?
Probably like Ragnar. My current deck runs Ragnar, Bestial Mutant, and Brub. Like if I have an opening hand that has like Brub and Ragnar, and I've only got like 4 magic. I'll probably discard Ragnar so I can threaten Brub. The thing is, like, I feel like I often have enough magic to summon all 3 if the game goes long enough. Because I don't have that many expensive commons that I'm really paying for. Most of my commons cost 1, or just like a few of my flex slots are more expensive.
What cards, if any, if you could break the normal deck building rules, what cards would you add into your Brub deck? If you could add like one card, as many copies as you want, into your deck from any deck.
I haven't thought about that too much. Like when we had a draft tournament or a little draft event that we did one day with some people in this area, we decided that Slip By was really good and that Law of Liberty was really good, no matter what your faction was. But I don't know if those would be that good here, because I think the funny one that might actually be really good is Law of Loyalty, because that would allow you to hit your opponent's summoner even harder with a Tundra Fighter. Old Blood Summon would have been fun. No, I don't know. I'm still trying to think, because like I often think about just in terms of those. I mean, I already can get Y2 if I want them, and I haven't usually wanted them. I think I could play Torridon too. Is there anything else that like really helps to have extra rerolls with? Something that's very important that it hits or something like that, or that cares a lot about specials.
If you could pull epics, you could pull like Out of Shadows. That might be,
Yeah.
that might be a fun one.
I mean, the deck really works pretty well. Oh, I know. Although it would probably kill itself. I was thinking like Hellforged Weapon from Fire.
Yeah.
Find a way to get even more dice, but that would probably end up killing itself. That's a good question. I think I know my answer. Took me a while, but I think I got there. The card that'd be most useful would be Chant of Weaving.
Interesting. Get some more boosts.
Get some more boosts on Grognak, potentially, but also allows you to summon when you're getting pressured. Because that's the thing that I struggle with the most. Because there would be times where my gates are down, or similar things like that, where it's like, oh, I'm in a lot of trouble because my gates are blocked, or, you know, whatever. So if you could summon off a Grognak and get boost on him, I think that'd probably be the most useful event. Or up there, you know, like I definitely put it in as a one of, maybe even take out a willpower or 2.
This might not be as useful, but another one I thought about was Ares Steward.
Okay.
Bring the Ares Steward in with all those rerolls, and you could use for glory with it.
Yeah, I mean, for Gloriana Steward and lots of rerolls, you could do a lot of damage.
You could do a lot of damage. Too bad you can't like toss axe on there, but
No, yeah, because melee. But then you'd want like a hand cannon, maybe.
yeah, maybe with hand cannon.
Oh, I was thinking about the dragons. I wonder if you could like use a dragon to fly a fighter in, like Cinderwing.
That could be good too. There's some good options.
Oh, Emerge. Like if you're talking about epics, like Emerge would be good. Just get your Brub when you need it.
But it doesn't work that well because you would just get minus. We would get minus nothing.
It mostly be for the ability to search for the
champ.
Yeah.
And Emerge could allow you, if you got it like super early, to discard it and pull it back, which could be nice.
Yeah.
A little flexibility there. There's some good options. There's always some good options when you open it up. What about... No, that wouldn't work. I thought Insight for a second, but that wouldn't work because it's the draw. It's not actually the boost on your summoners.
Yeah, I guess that's the other thing. You just try to look for things to just add a lot of boost to your summoner, but there's not that many.
Yeah, you could get Learn.
Just to get 2 boosts on
Yep. 2 boosts, or you get some random event cards. That could be good.
I have to remember that Chant of Weaving, though, if I remember doing a draft and that's allowed. We did that once. We did a draft. I had Mountain Vargath, and I had like Slip By and Law of Loyalty, and that was pretty cool.
That would be good.
Slip By is insane. It's a very good event. When you're just looking at raw like card power, even though it costs 1 magic, it just does a lot. You said you were working on a Wayfarer's deck?
Yes, I was working on a Wayfarer's deck just to see, because people always say Wayfarers don't really work in deck building, and I was like, oh, I'll give it a shot. It's essentially a poor man's like Cave Goblins deck.
That's often how I felt, is that it just feels like a worse Cave Goblins, but continue.
It swarms really well, and like Clingers, I find work like super well in this deck. I should probably add a couple more, but it has like Clingers, it has Callers, it has Climbers, it has a couple illusions, Fox and Stag, some Bandits in there, and then a couple Adventurers. And I run a Battle Leader, some Airy Gates, which weren't that useful last time, so I could probably get rid of 1 Slip By, and 2 Sneak, and then Gusto, Ezek, and Dagger.
No Boldo.
No Baldo, because Baldo's not as helpful when you're just trying to get up close and personal. And Baldo's more expensive.
Yeah, I could see Ezek being really good for sure.
Yeah, I haven't played Jexik yet in my 2 games. I got killed before I could play Jexik in my last game. I had a chance to win it, and he pulled off a nice little combo to finish me. But Jexik could be really good for getting Dagger behind, or a 0 cost to swap with Dagger. I found that I have like 3 or 4 ways to get a Horde Clinger to the spot it needs to be. Like, I would get Horde Clingers stranded out, and every single time they were stranded, I could still get it back to where I needed to be, move it a space or 2. Because you have the callers that can move it a space. You have Prepared with and Embark with the Adventurer. You have Rush with the Stag. You have Sneak. So like I was never in a spot where I couldn't use my Clinger, even if they got stranded, which was fun.
You know what's a really funny interaction that sounds like you don't have in that deck is Spirit Voyager with Klinger.
Yeah, I do have it, but only because there's one in the starting setup.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I did use that in one of my games. Yeah, it is a fun one because you can Spirit Leap and then Cling. If you had to offer any words to people who are unsure about getting into deck building, what would you tell them?
There's no shame, I think, in copying another person's deck to start to get a feel for something, you know? So message people who, you know, do deck building and to see if they could give you some ideas or just share a deck. It's pretty easy to just copy and paste the deck from the deck builder and just give yourself a starting point. Because I think that's the biggest thing I hear from people is that they don't know where to start or they don't want to make a deck. It just seems like extra work. I feel like if you are inclined to just build your own decks, you're probably already doing it and doing deck building, you know? The other half, I would say, there are people that get really embroiled in balance debates and they always wanting to change this card or tweak that card or do this. And if you think about it, deck building allows you to sit in the designer's seat for a bit and design a deck the way you want it to be. I'm not saying it'll be super balanced or even any good. You might make a deck that's worse. That's the big thing to avoid when you're making a deck, and you don't know until you try it out whether you've made a deck that's actually just worse than the base deck. But ideally, you're making decks that are better and that are more fun and filling in the weaknesses that you find in the base deck. I'm not sure it's necessarily the top tier deck of all, but you can make good Vanguards and good Shimmer Sea Fade decks that do things and fill their weaknesses in various ways. You can put more gates in Shimmer Sea Fae. You can get something that allows you to tutor for your other champions. Maybe not other champions, but you can tutor for gates with Brundor or whatever. Things you can do that can make a deck your own and also fill in some of those gaps. So if you ever find yourself thinking, I wish I could do this in this deck, well, you can. The format exists, you know, like there's a way to try out these things. The other half of it, I would say, is like I said, if you want there to be more aggression or more combo type of stuff, you can do that too. If you feel kind of alienated by the grindy, long games, you know, those can still happen in deck building, and there's certain decks that'll make be even more grindy and long. If you think that like you want to see other types of strategies come to the fore, you should give deck building a shot.
This has been a brief of Brub, and we hope you guys enjoyed it. We'll talk to you guys in a couple weeks.